Welcome back to another episode of The Founder, a show that features entrepreneurs and their early stories of ingenuity, struggle, and perseverance to get their companies off the ground. We do our best to capture the uncensored, uncovered look behind the curtain into what founders really face when getting started. I'm your host, Kallaway. Our founder guest on today's episode has spent the last 15 years mastering her craft as a storyteller through a variety of creative fields. After graduating from NYU Film School, she spent time at different magazines and tech companies before ultimately landing at jetsetter.com and formally entering the world of marketing. When she worked at Jetsetter, social media was emerging as a game-changing portal for two-way brand communication, and she was fascinated by the power it gave those brands to own their narrative and talk directly to their customers. She then went on to work in marketing roles at Michael Kors and most recently Sweetgreen, helping expand their footprint nationwide. Along the way, she had countless conversations with founders and VCs and understood a common deprioritization of marketing and branding in the early days of a startup. She knew from her experience how critical it was to build this foundation and wanted to create a badass team of marketers who could fill that gap. That's how Farrynheight was born. Today at Farrynheight, this founder and her team run a brand strategy and marketing SWAT team. Their sweet spot is to work with early stage companies to help them launch or relaunch their brands. The team is unique in that they're incredibly selective about the clients they work with, serving as an extension of the core team and completely replacing the marketing function in some cases. Their unique makeup of all-stars is seamlessly able to zoom in and zoom out, helping founders understand the high-level strategy behind building a powerful brand, as well as the tactical steps needed to execute on that brand vision day in and day out. To date, they've worked with companies like Reformation, Bandier, Highline Wellness, Monument, Scentbird, and more. This was an inspiring interview that shines a spotlight on the power of a brand. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Now introducing the founder of Farrynheight, Farryn Weiner. Let's get it. Farryn, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to you today. I think you're a wealth of knowledge for branding and marketing and so much more. So I'm pumped to get into it. Before we get into the business and how that's progressed, can you just give people a snapshot for kind of what Farrynheight is today? You know, like what are the services you offer? What's the vision? Why'd you start it? And kind of, you know, any KPIs you use to measure growth.
So Farrynheight is a new age brand marketing and really brand strategy SWAT team. And the reason that we use the term SWAT team is because we're really built to go into organizations, early stage startups in the beginning days of their growth and help them launch or relaunch anything. So we like to think of ourselves as a support system for founders, helping them navigate the 30,000 foot view of what does it take to build my brand, and really the 100-foot view of this is launching tomorrow. Like, what do I need to do to make sure my email is deployed in the right way? And really why Farrynheight first began was I've spent the last 15 years working on the brand marketing side of the fence for organizations like Michael Kors and Sweetgreen. And over the trajectory of my career, I had countless conversations with early stage founders and really VCs, to be honest, who felt like in those beginning days, figuring out your brand is not necessarily a priority in terms of what you're going to spend on your team, on your first hires, but it is critical in terms of navigating the questions around internal culture and then external culture creation. And so we wanted to build what is really an agency, although we think of ourselves more like a team. I really wanted to go out and build a team agnostic to any business and say, hey, we're here for rent for any given period of time to help support founders in launching their brands.
Totally. Yeah, I love that kind of strategic, high level, then really tactical, doing both. Not everybody does that. So that's awesome. I'm pumped to get into all the brand stuff too, because I think brand is one of those things that everybody wants it, so hard to get it. And like there's so many mysteries. Before we dive into those concepts, I'd love to just get, you know, a walkthrough of your background. Where did you get started? Did you jump right into corporate brand and marketing? And you mentioned Michael Kors Sweetgreen. Take us through that journey a little bit to launching Farrynheight.
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, I consider myself a storyteller. And I started out my career really navigating a variety of creative fields. I was in NYU Film School. I went back for my graduate degree in really like authenticity and new media and sort of global media. I worked in magazines, I worked in tech companies, and I really was just exploring how are all of these different forms of communication helping us tell stories around the world. And really, I got my first sort of entry point into marketing at Gilt Group under the jetsetter.com umbrella, really when social media was first launching. And social media was really transforming the way we told stories because it was the first time that you could talk two-sided, open-ended, customer and brand, and unlocking the ability for everyone to have a voice. And so I really leaned into it, sort of became obsessed with it. And that's really where my sort of creative experience led me into a marketing role. And I was really testing and learning. At Jetsetter, I was really just throwing things against the wall and seeing what stuck. Realized I had a natural instinct, I think back to being a storyteller for connecting with people on both sides of the coin, and really helped Jetsetter build what was sort of the first ever and really for them, but I think at the time, a lot of brands, one of the first ever social media like strategies that were implemented by businesses ended up going over to Michael Kors during really a huge time in their growth. It was pre-IPO. We had a massive international expansion on the horizon, and it was really about how do we build these new forms of marketing and media for the first time. So responsible for building Michael's first ever social team, thinking about omni-channel marketing, globally, what is Twitter and Facebook and Instagram launched while I was at Michael? What do all of these platforms mean for a business? And not only what do they mean for the business, but what do they mean for our customer and our audiences globally? So really spent time at Michael unlocking the world of social and then how social really translated, in my mind, to being a core part of brand marketing. After my time at Michael, went over to Sweetgreen as the VP of Brand and Marketing, really to help them position Sweetgreen on the national stage. Sweetgreen is one of the leading fast casual restaurants here in the US and had the incredible opportunity to really bring that brand to life. It was a labor of love and an extraordinary experience. And that ultimately led me to where I am now running Farrynheight.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the experiences you've had, especially at the time when you were there at each of those brands is amazing. Transformative times for all of those companies.
Yeah, I can't tell if I was lucky or if I just had a good knack for timing,
Yeah, you were hey, you had to open all those doors for
I'll
everyone.
give myself some credit.
Yeah. So I'd love to get into when you approach thinking about brand strategy. Let's say I'm a startup and I come to you and you're just becoming exposed to us for the first time. How do you approach that playbook? And what are the most important things for these brands early on to get right? And what are some of these things that maybe brands you don't work with, you see are getting wrong?
I could answer that question in a lot of different ways. A couple of things come to mind. The first is the way I look at brand versus marketing is that marketing is a sprint and brand is a marathon. Marketing is really the tools and the mechanics that you're using to really drive customer acquisition, to drive growth, to drive sales, to drive sort of an immediate ROI, whereas brand is more of a long-term effort towards creating connection and loyalty with your audience. And you said it before, which is everybody wants a great brand, but no one wants to invest in it. It's sort of the last thing that when you cut to the chase, people really want to invest in. And I think there's a fundamental misconception that brand is one, not important sometimes, and then also that it's easy. It's actually an incredibly hard, long journey, and you have to be really radically dedicated to building it. So for early brands, and I think for us, we at Farrynheight talk a lot about being human and building brands with our founders where we treat each other and our customers like humans. And so for us, we're really drawn to, and I think founders are drawn to us that are wanting to build authentic, real connections with their community and who want to find what is unique to themselves. So when we look at a brand and we're wanting to say, okay, how do we start figuring out this brand and what is brand strategy? The first place we look to is to the founder. Why did they start this business? What is their mission? What is their purpose? And then we look at the customer. What is that product market fit? What is the customer looking for? What is the emotional sort of reason why they would buy into our brand? And we start with these fundamental questions, and it's generally a process of elimination. It's more eliminating what we're not than really defining what we are, I think, in the beginning.
Yeah. I've gone through the exercise a few times of writing down, what's my vision, brand for a few things. And do you find that the founders you work with have that pretty dialed, or typically they think they do and there's a lot more they can go? And after a few sessions with your team, they're holy shit, we unlocked so much.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I think it's the both and. We were actually talking about this on the Farrynheight podcast this past week, which is what comes first, product or strategy? Like, does product inform your strategy or does your strategy inform your product? And the answer is there's no right answer. It can be both. I think more often than not, founders have a sense of their strategy, and we really hope to pull it out of them and help codify it into something that can be executed on. I would say one of my favorite things is when we figure out that there's a misalignment between like the customer and maybe the founder or the customer and the brand, because in the alignment normally unlocks the ability for a brand to like really be themselves and own a space.
Yeah. So you talk about the clouds and dirt, as Gary Vee says, like the strategy and the tactics. So I definitely want to go through that for both the branding side and the marketing side. So on the branding side, right, you talked a lot about the strategic, like get the founder aligned, understand the founder vision. From like a tactical playbook, what are some of the things you do to help enhance and build the brand, right? Is it get the visual identity down? I think community is a massive part of brand. Take Highline, for example, who will be on a couple episodes before you. Like, what are some of the steps you did for them early on?
Yeah, Highline is a incredible CBD business and so much more. And Chris, the founder, is really such a good example of like a Farrynheight founder. Super values driven, dedicated to his product, dedicated to his community, and really, really willing to learn. And I think has been such a great example for us of the value we can really add, because we've created such a level of trust between his brand and us, where he really allows us to have a seat at the table and help to build the brand in places where, quite frankly, as a founder, he just doesn't have the time today. And he also doesn't have the internal resource, because at his early stage of growth, he's not hiring a super senior level marketer and or brand leader yet, right? I like to think about this a lot, which is when I first joined Sweetgreen at a VP level, they were 7 years into the business. They were 7 years in, and that's a unicorn. That's an incredibly successful company, where the first time where they were really investing in sort of a brand leader like myself was 7 years in. So how do we give founders just enough in those early days where they're heading in the right direction? So I guess in terms of like what's important and actionable, which was the question you asked, God, brand can live and breathe in so many areas. It's actually quite limitless. One of the things I like to do as an exercise with founders, once we've locked a brand strategy, is say, if you were the head of accounting, how could this brand strategy impact what you do? Even in the language that you use. When you're looking in a retail environment, that brand strategy should impact the way that your retail team treats a customer who walks in the front, in the front door. Now, your brand team is responsible for executing on, to me, two things. One, the communication of that message holistically across the company from the top down, and making sure everyone is living and breathing it. And then they're responsible for brand marketing, right? And when we think of brand marketing, it's community, it's social, it's influencer, it's the creative output. So at Farrynheight, we'll start with the really basic foundation, right? So building the sort of framework of the brand. And the way we look at building brands or helping brands launch or relaunch anything is there's the build phase, there's the plan phase, and there's the go phase. And we'll help founders on scaling sort of ways, if you will. First, how do we build it? Then launch would really be, what are the right strategies around those channels we talked about? So whether they're brand or marketing channels, how are we being a bit of a resource to ensuring consistency across everything? And then on the go phase, for these early stage founders, they just need more hands sometimes.
Totally.
So we can jump in, when there's a launch, when there's a campaign, and help add value by actually getting things done.
That's awesome. I was thinking about the most pressing questions I have around brand. And I think, a lot of founders we've had on here and even other companies where like I've watched their podcasts or on YouTube, I feel like the party line for a lot of these companies is like, oh, I want to be a brand that's here in 100 years. Like everybody seems to say that, but the brands that do exist decades and decades, like how do great brands stay great for that long? Like what is it about those other than product market fit, and why users need them and they keep evolving. But like from your perspective, what do you think those brands do best?
The first brand that popped into my mind was Nike while you were talking.
Yeah.
And I'm a Nike fan. I feel like anyone who knows me knows this. I think there's a couple of things. The first is clarity. I would say the second thing would be a focus on your customer and really a conviction in your values. And the conviction in your values sort of creates the fourth, which I would say would be culture, right? So when I think about it, what's really interesting about brand and sort of those lasting brands to me is what everyone wants is a silver bullet answer. And believe me, everyone asks me all the time, like, what's the secret to a brand? The secret to a brand, I think, is the ability to be yourself. And it is, it's culture. Like, one of the things I think that's become really much more discussed and sort of more widely shared in the last few years is the importance of internal culture and how it impacts external. And you're seeing it in a lot of places with brands where the internal culture doesn't match what they're saying externally, and they're starting to get called out for it, right? Whereas I think if you go to the Nike campus, and I've been there before, the brand is living and breathing in the walls.
Yeah, you can feel it
You
in the
can
air.
feel it in the air. And that radical dedication to the culture, to the mission, to the values, to the vision is seeping through their strategy, the way teams operate, the way they communicate with people. And that is everlasting because trends are going to change, products are going to change. But if you are committed to why you're here, how do you want to show up, and what is the product, and how are you connecting to your customer, that's everlasting.
Definitely.
Right. And to me, that's where it's really that marathon, because building a strong culture that's meaningful, where as people and products and trends change, you sort of are like this, line in the sand, if you will. I think that takes a lot of discipline and commitment.
Totally. It's amazing. You think about companies, 10, 20, 50 people, it's hard enough to like infuse that culture from the top and then like make sure every single person you hire keeps that. Nike's huge, and like every single person, from the person at the store to the campus to et cetera, they all exude that same like juice. Like you don't know exactly what it is, but it's the Nike culture.
Yeah.
So I totally get it.
That juice is really brand. And that, calling it juice is hard to find and hard to create.
Yeah. I think you're one of the first ones we've had on the show that's built more of a service business. And so I'd love to peel back the layers on that. I think one of the hard things with a service business, as I'm sure you found, is like, it's hard to clone you, right? You only have so much time in the day. And so like, I'm sure every brand wants you or a piece of you. So how do you think about like, how big is Farrynheight today? And like on a typical engagement, how plugged in are you throughout the process, and you have your team kind of take over day to day?
Yeah. That's the $1 million question. And I think in full transparency, one of the tensions between the reason why we created Farrynheight, why we're here, and how we scale, completely. We started Farrynheight about 1.5 years ago, and it was always about this sort of idea that these early stage founders might not need me full time, but what value could we add if they had me fractionally, right?
Okay.
And if fractionally they had this level of partnership, leadership, strategic, thinking, while also a support system underneath them. We are 15 people at Farrynheight today. We're an all-female agency. We work with anywhere from 10 to 15 clients at a given time. And really that flex is sort of, if you are inducted, if you will, into the Farrynheight family, you have access to us at any given time. So if one of our founders, like Chris, who has definitely used this before, all of a sudden has an opportunity come up and like in 10 days needs something launched, he picks up the phone, he calls me, and we're literally SWAT teaming it the next day.
That's awesome.
So, and it's really cool because we get to see like the real impact that we add and the real support that we provide. And I think it's just, back to being human. I've worked for incredible founders my whole life. From Michael Kors to the 3 Sweetgreen guys, I've had the opportunity. I've never really had a job that isn't founder-led. And I've got to understand the beauty of that role, the challenges of that role, and quite frankly, the emotion of that role. And I think when you have a single founder or co-founders who are in that early stage sort of clawing their way to growth, having a resource that you can really believe and rely on, I think adds tremendous value and something that we really take pride in being able to provide. On the question of scale, I've been able to really hire incredible people surrounding me at Farrynheight. I'm super proud of the team that we've built. I think maybe even more than a marketer, I love building teams and think I have a skill set in sourcing and finding talent that have similar values, that have skill sets, but really more than anything, like have potential and passion. And so how we think about it at Farrynheight and how we're thinking about scaling is, one, we believe in staying intimate for us right now. And I don't know where we're going to go in the future, but we believe that if we can add value to a small group of founders at any given time, that's really where we want to be today. And we want to be more immersive, which is why we call ourselves a team more than really an agency, because we feel like to the founders, short of having an email address at their company, like we are part of the team and we're a part of all the conversations. How we start to scale that is really by offering it at a variety of different levels. So we have another really senior leader at Farrynheight who was the VP of marketing at another really strong direct-to-consumer brand, was at Michael Kors with me. And so we're starting to see what it looks like where we have this offering, if you will, of a CMO level thinker providing value to the founders with a team underneath. For me, being able to pick up the phone and talk to the founders every day is really where I think of my time should be spent 50-50, like 50% with the founders, thinking through what they need and helping to navigate it, even if we're not going to do it, quite frankly. And then 50% with my team, helping to teach and train and lead and coach.
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you is I've been seeing a lot on Twitter, like about productizing, like how do you productize the service you offer? But the other side of it may be you might be so valuable that keeping that like small collective is more important and a better strategy than trying to productize and getting to 1,000 people.
We think about this every day. I think as a business, any business wants to think about how do you productize, how do you create value, and how do you monetize that offering. Part of this high touch experience that we're providing, we talked about the juice before of Nike. It's like sort of that's part of the juice, So I think the way we think about it more is how do we productize paths of marketing? Like, for example, a founder at an early stage of growth, one of the benefits of working with us is that we are already a well-oiled machine, right? So I've spent my last 13, 14 years in-house at marketing companies building teams. So I sort of said to myself, what if I build a really strong brand marketing team agnostic to any business?
Exactly, yeah.
And over time, with every client, with every project, my team gets better, faster, and stronger. We are the well-oiled machine that knows, okay, what does it take to turn on this initiative? What does it take to launch a product? What does it take to launch this campaign? So the founder is getting all of that value inherently. So we like to think what we productize is plans. We productize not what they are, because that's unique to the story, the mission, the purpose of each brand, but how we get it done. Like over this last year, we've launched probably 10 brands. Believe me, we've had a ton of learnings, and with every one we get better.
Yeah, but then number 11 has all the education for the first 10.
Exactly.
It's interesting because maybe they'll get to a point where like a founder has a very lean team forever and they just have, you guys are the fractional CMO, they have a fractional CHRO, they have a fractional CFO. And like some companies are starting to play that way, but I think what you're articulating, you guys are doing it really, really well on the marketing and brand side. And it would be interesting to see a company like a startup that was built that way.
I think Highline's a great example. Chris when we first started with Chris, it was over a year and a half ago. He was really one of the first Farrynheight family members. And we really at that time didn't anticipate that we'd have partners for a year and a half and really no sign of slowing down. I think that for us, what we recognize is just like, there's sort of two interesting points here. Just like if I was the head of marketing inside of your company, the needs are going to change. The teams are going to shift. The resources are going to get bigger and better, hopefully with growth, right? So at every point and turn, Farrynheight has just adapted. We like to say we're adaptable and malleable because it's startup life.
Totally.
We might think we're going down one path, and at midnight, a founder is going to call me and say it's a new one. And that is the reality of what startups are and how they should operate. I say 75% of everything you do in a startup is fixed and 25 is a surprise. And so I think that for us, we really think about what does a world look like where when we are done here, one, we've built a really sustainable system that a brand and a business can continue on. Two, they're really ready for internal hires and we're helping them and supporting in that transition. And we've left a founder better than we found them, where they really, really have built a muscle themselves just by nature of working with us on building a brand and a dedication to their culture and values.
Totally. I love that. It's a great approach.
Yeah.
So on the marketing side, I typically ask a lot of especially D2C companies that come on, like, what's the playbook? Like, I love getting into tactics that they're using. So I'd love to hear, like, similar to how we did for brand, how do you approach customer acquisition and like the whole kind of marketing playbook? I feel like it's never been more fun to be a marketer. There's so many different channels you can experiment with. How has that worked for you over the past few clients that you've implemented it?
Yeah, I think that answer is loaded in a lot of ways because it's never been more fun to be a marketer, but it's also never been harder to stay focused. And, right, marketing is a really tough job. Like there's been a lot of talk around the CMO role being a sort of like an antiquated job because it is the first person to get blamed and the last person to get credit for anything, you know? And I think part of it is that there is just so much newness every single day. A very experienced CMO of one of the largest companies here in the US said to me recently, marketing is a young person's game, which actually upset me. And I argued with her about it. But the reason she said that was she said, it used to be that you had an understanding of how to connect with the consumer and how to sort of like drive that messaging. Now there's thousands of tactics and channels and technologies you have to be versed in. And I think that what works for one brand doesn't always work for the other. What I think works for brands, especially in their early days, is picking 1 to 3 things you want to be extraordinary at. Then once you pick those 1 or 2 or 3 things, think about how anything else you do can underpin that. So for example, if you are going to, let's say, really lean into experiential, which is actually less relevant right now because of COVID and what's going on. How does digital support that? How do your influencer support that? How does your messaging and marketing support that so that you can really become known for something? I think that there is, again, I said this earlier, there's no silver bullet for brand. I think that creative and content and brand marketing should always have a foil on performance and paid digital acquisition. You should always be thinking about how are the two working together, not against each other. But I've found that, and by the way, talking about brand, I would argue that some of the startups that have really made noise and sort of punched through all of the noise are the ones that picked a lane and got really, really good at it.
Yeah, and got like known for that.
Got known for it. You know, like I think Glossier is a great example of, they were known for like community activation, content, and social. Like they just rallied an audience. Sweetgreen was known for experiential. You know, we launched before I even got there, predating me, they had launched a music festival when they were like a 5-unit salad restaurant. So I think that there's a lot of different there are a lot of ways, if you will, to market your brand. Think about what you find to be most meaningful, where you can make the most impact. Definitely test and learn, right? Throw some things against the wall, but then also look at everything holistically and say, is this working together or against each other? Because if you have, let's say, $500,000 of a marketing budget, that $500,000 is going to go a lot further on 2 channels than it will on 10.
Totally. Yeah, the focus is so key.
Focus is super key. And it's really hard in marketing because, you know, I talk about this a lot, but everyone sees marketing, you know?
Yeah, like, everything's shiny,
everything's shiny, everything's new. People read articles, they see what other brands are doing on Instagram. You know, you're getting texts from your founder's uncle's daughter. I mean, there is no shortage of people of ideas and of input. So it's really about sort of, again, that getting really, really clear of like, no, this is the path I want to take, and the stake in the ground that I want to put as a brand or a business.
Totally. Just, this may put you on the spot a bit, but what's one of your favorite campaigns / like movements, activations that you've done for one of the brands in the portfolio? And like, you know, how do you think about it? How do you come up with the idea, and what was the result? Something like outside the box.
So one of my favorite campaigns we did this year was actually for the Save Barneys campaign. And in full SWAT team fashion, I think this is just such a good example of what can happen when there's real clarity and a team of people working towards the same goal. We got a call from a friend on Saturday around noon saying, hey, do you want to help Save Barneys? It was literally that simple. I started my career, you know, in New York, working sort of before my storytelling days in some fashion organizations here in New York. I worked for Zac Posen, I worked for Tod's. Barneys has always had a special place in my heart. And I was like, hell yeah, I definitely want to save Barneys. And talk about culture. When this sort of call came on a Saturday, I went and I found out what it was about. And then I called the Farrynheight team and I said, this is a democracy. It's Saturday. Who wants to save Barneys? Who doesn't? Like, this isn't a requirement. And of course, everyone was like, hell yes. Like, we're coming to the office. We're going to do this. So we spent about 2 days working on somewhat of a propaganda campaign where it was really, there was sort of a battle royale happening between 2 competing parties that wanted to buy Barneys. Barneys was going bankrupt. There was sort of like a option on the table, and there was a group that was going to have to decide ultimately which one won. One of the groups wanted to retain Barneys, sort of keep its core, keep its essence, and build it back to what it was once known. And one wanted to, no pun intended, sort of break it apart from more of like a business point of view. So we developed this viral video campaign. We developed propaganda materials. And it really just was this incredible experience for us of working together. We started working on it Saturday night and we launched it Monday morning, and sort of went viral and really created created, honestly, such an outpouring of love around what Barney's meant to people, its place in New York's history, its place in culture, and just a great reminder again of tapping into emotion and the power behind it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was it saved? It was saved, right?
It ended up being saved, not by our party, but we still felt like it was a win. And what's really interesting is another brand that we work with that I can just touch on is a business called Monument. So Monument is a platform for those looking to change their relationship with alcohol. And really, Monument is sort of a three-part business. There's prescription medication, there's online therapy, and there's community, all for people who want to really shift their relationship with alcohol and look at things through a new lens. We were able to work with them starting really before launch, and it's been an unbelievable experience of helping to change the point of view and conversation around addiction and sobriety. Really, this idea that life doesn't have to stop for you wanting to change your life, that you shouldn't have to be anonymous, and that there's communities of people out there like you who are really challenged with the same things, and there's no real need to hide. So a lot of the campaigns we've done with Monument have been some of the nearest and dearest to my heart and to the Farrynheight team's heart, because as the founder likes to tell us, we're saving lives every day, and we really believe we are. So that is a really cool one where we launched a campaign called Monument Live. And this was very much a collaboration with their internal team where celebrities, entrepreneurs, and leaders from Elizabeth Vargas to Rumor Willis to Mike the Situation on these private Zoom calls, sort of talking to our community about their experience with sobriety. And that's a great example of something that came out of how do we create community and how do we tap into what our audience wants most in a way that's really meaningful and personal to them.
Totally. I'd love to hear your take on this kind of D2C landscape. Not to say that every company you work with is D2C, but I know at least Highline is, and there are definitely some others. And D2C has exploded, of course, over the last 3 to 5 years and will continue to grow. But how do you square the seemingly infinite amount of companies that are D2C born every day with the increasing e-commerce share of wallet, from people? Like, at what point does it get to a head where there's too much choice? Like, what do you think is going to happen in the industry over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think we're there, to be honest. And I think that a lot of the brands that we talk to and work with, even if they're rooted in direct to consumer, right? Direct to consumer, I think from my point of view, there was 2 really powerful things about it. One was obviously profitability, right? You could directly sell product to your customer. You could decrease the price generally from retail environments, and you could have incredible customer acquisition costs. And we're talking now 15 years ago. The second is you can control every touch point and messaging of the brand, which unlocked unlimited potential for brands. I think about Warby Parker and just like that first ever experience where you didn't have to go into we're not going to name names, you didn't have to go into a retail environment to buy sunglasses for multi-brands, but you could just get this try-on box with messaging in their beautiful blue and that really just immersive experience of messaging and through the whole product. So now I think brands are really thinking about, how do I diversify? Even if I am a direct-to-consumer business, how do I reach new audiences and find profitability? And to your point, mind share and wallet share elsewhere, because it is not as lucrative anymore to build a direct-to-consumer brand. Customer acquisition costs have changed. It's really competitive.
Yeah.
It's super hard to make noise, and there's a ton of competition. I think that I read this really good book recently that I'll DM you the name of it so that you have it, or if anyone wants to DM me, you can ask. I'm forgetting it. It's an old school classic branding book. And a lot of this book I actually did not agree with and found to be antiquated. But one of the things that I liked in it that I thought was interesting was this idea that there's a first and a second spot, right? So like a Nike or an Adidas, right? There's like a first and a second spot. And the second spot is actually a great place to be in because you always are reaching towards a goal. But when you start to have a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, it's really hard to compete. You might have a nice business. So like if your goal is I want to have a nice business,
like
a lifestyle business, or you're self-funded and you build a really profitable toothpaste brand, that is remarkable and absolutely. But when you're talking about venture-backed direct-to-consumer startups, I think when that first and second spot get filled, they're really off to a competitive race.
I totally agree. And not even to be like everything's been thought of, but like almost every category has at least 3 to 4 like prominent D2C players in the last 5 years that have come up. I'm sure there's more room for innovation, but it's getting to that point, like you said, where some of those brands, like they're going to have to either die or become a lifestyle business and stop raising venture capital because they just won't be able to return.
Yeah, or figure out how do you drive enough organic growth where you're not reliant on paid acquisition and paid digital, which is a really hard balance to strike. A question we get often is, how do I drive organic growth? And I'm like, well, look at what you've invested in over your first 2 years. You put 90% of your budget into paid acquisition. Why would you expect organic? And then the same founders, you'll go to them and say, okay, why don't you split the budget 50-50? And they're like, oh, no. So it's this really interesting thing, back to what I said before, of like, brand is the thing everyone wants and the thing no one wants to invest in, but that, like, when push comes to shove and you're looking at your marketing budget, it's really one of the first things that's really easy to cut, even for me.
It's so true. It's such a long game. Like, it's
a long game.
No, we don't live in a long-term world. That's the problem. Nobody thinks long-term.
It's funny too, because when you said before, like, I want to build a brand that like lasts forever, I was actually thinking, does anyone think that way anymore? Like, I think it's really rare. I feel like more often than not, the reality, if we're being real, is I want to build a brand to get acquired or get sold.
Yeah, totally. People are thinking in like 10-year mindsets, not
right.
50.
Like, I mean, I think, I would love to work. And I think there are founders who are on a long-term mission, and that's really fun. But God, it would be fun to work with a brand that's like, I want to be here as this brand in 100 years. And how differently do we build than, a brand that's looking for an exit?
Yeah. And we'll see, it'll take, the only way to get there is it's going to take another 10, 15 years to see which ones. But I think there are some that have started that, like, I think Uber will be around for sure in like
Definitely.
20, 30 years. There's some. When you think about like it's easy for founders to come on here and talk about all the great things and what's going well, but something that I've started asking that I really like to hear is, when you think about growing the business and growing Farrynheight, like, what are some things that didn't work or like haven't worked in the last couple of years? And from that, like, what are some adjustments you made on the fly that you would share with aspiring founders?
Yeah, I mean, I'm notoriously known for talking about shortcomings, failures, and missteps, because I think for me, it was only in that moment of what I consider sort of this moment of failure that I became fearless and therefore actually went after what I wanted, and ironically have never been more successful. And success, I'm not defining what that is. It could be something different for everyone. But for me, successful was really doing something where I could be both ambitious and happy, rewarding and fulfilling, but also like in a flow, which it took me a while to figure out. So a couple of things that I think have been some key learnings for us, definitely, I'd say first for me was when I set out to launch Farrynheight, it was really like this balance of, how do I make an impact while staying external? And I think one of the things that's hard, and it's hard for any service-based business, is really finding the right boundary between expectations, delivering on the needs of a founder, and then also protecting your business in order to grow. There were definitely times where we've sacrificed Farrynheight in order to work and make a founder happy. And really, not happy isn't the right word, but to give them that extra support and extra need. And sometimes it happens at the sacrifice of my team. And so that was, something, and we talk really openly at Farrynheight about everything. One of our core values is like really just being human. And being human requires a level of vulnerability as a leader. When we were sitting on the 100th Zoom call during COVID, I looked at my team and said, guys, I've never been here before. Like, I've never been a founder of an agency in a pandemic. So like, I'm really trying to do my best, but I just want to be clear, like, I don't have all the answers. I'm committed to finding them. I'm committed to our values, to who we are, and to supporting each of you, but I just want to be real and keep it real. So I think finding a balance as a service business between building your business and brand and building your brands is really a thing we're going to strike. I think also a really big lesson is saying no. And this sort of transcends outside of Farrynheight to just anything that I've done in business. Learning the art of saying no. We talked about this in the beginning, learning the art of saying no and how to say no softly and kindly with a lot of confidence is such an incredible tool that I think, one of the things I really have recognized when you're a founder is you want to please your team, you want to please your investors. And I see that on the other side of the fence with some of our founders, you want to please your customer. But if you're pleasing all of those people, you're definitely not doing always what's right. And so how do you learn to disappoint people? And that to me would be a really good lesson for a founder to learn early on.
It's so hard. That's one of the hardest things. And I think it's such an unlock when people figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with it every day, and I've only gotten more and more conscious of it, I think now. What's really interesting about Farrynheight, and one of the things that I think is, you talked before about how I'm one of the first service sort of providers, if you will, which is like a weird way to describe us, but service providers on it. But I think about Farrynheight as a parallel journey to our founders. I'm a year and a half into my business. We have 15 full-time, incredible team members. And I am facing the same questions and the same challenges that a lot of my founders are facing. Often, when we have a new idea around brand or activating community, we will test it on ourselves first. Farrynheight is really a microcosm of what it means to have a strong culture and have a strong brand. If I can't lead an effective culture here, I can't teach and help my founders doing it. If I can't run a successful social campaign, I can't help my founders do it. So we look at Farrynheight as a guinea pig. And I come with the 15 years of experience being in-house at brands as a marketer, but as a leader and a founder, I'm learning as I go and facing a lot of the same challenges that they are, which gives, I think, a real authenticity to figuring it out together.
Totally. I mean, Fahrenheit's the sandbox. You've got like a free sandbox to play and like
totally
experiment and test things.
What's really interesting about it is actually with that freedom comes so much creativity. When I was at other brands, like I'd be so strict on certain areas of brand building. Like certain things had to be so planned in advance. Farrynheight is sort of like this like all access pass to being creative. Like literally it's very democratic. Anyone at Farrynheight has an idea, run with it, ship it, try it, test it, learn it. And actually the level of sort of like organic, by the way, growth and brand that we've developed, I think has been completely about this new way of thinking about brand in a more democratic way, which by the way challenges everything I've ever thought as a leader. So that too in and of itself is a bit of a gift.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like if I'm a founder, I want to work with you because not only do I have the Farrynheight sandbox, but there's 14 other sandboxes that things have been tried on and you've learned and things have worked, haven't worked. Like you're buying into that. Versus if you're on your own, like when you were at Sweetgreen, you have to basically like bet the house every time. I mean, you're not going to spend
all
the you got to bet the house every single time. So it's definitely beneficial to have that.
Yeah. And in an ideal world, our founders, and not in an ideal world, in this world, a lot of our founders talk to each other. They share insights, they share knowledge, they share information. You know, we'll ask one founder to connect with another. I think that hopefully over time that will continue and just continue to grow, where there's really this community being like, hey, we're all here to build great brands and businesses with similar values, which I think is really important to us. Why not be human? Keep it real. Tell each other where we failed and where we won.
Yeah, I think that like building transparently is something that a lot of companies are either just coming around to or still don't do. Like everyone's like hidden about like their learning. I think when you're transparent, things seem to come back to you, like benefits come back to you.
I'd actually love to ask you, after interviewing so many founders on the show, what do you think that word means?
Being transparent?
Yeah, as a business.
Yeah, so I think one of the brands I've had on that does it the best it's called Levels. If you've heard of it, it's kind of like it's a continuous glucose monitor. So they're kind of making that cool, where you wear it on your arm and it can sense the glucose levels you have inside your body at all times. So you can see like, all right, is this food that I thought was healthy actually doing good things for my blood sugar or not? So I kind of got a peek behind the curtain talking to the founder a bunch of times, and they've committed to one of their core tenets, their 3 core values is radical transparency. And so they, like all of their strategy documents, all of their long form marketing plans are all written on Google Docs that are all publicly available, and they'll share them with anyone, with investors, people who are trying to apply for the company. I think if you're a fan or a customer and you tweet them, like they'll add you to it. And that to me is so refreshing. Like I haven't seen any companies do that. And so what that does for you is it provides this sense of like, we're in it with you, right? If you're a customer, you can see behind the curtain. You can see if we're doing good. You can see if we're doing bad. And to me, that's something very, very unique. A lot of different brands do different things, not to that extent, but I think in essence, what you're saying, like the original question is like, what does transparency mean? I think it's just being authentic and being honest with every stakeholder in the chain, whether that's a customer, investor, and just like not withholding information.
I think that's a really good example because inherently those Google Docs are marketing. Not that they're about marketing, but by sharing them, that is a great example of where a brand value or a brand strategy becomes a tactic.
Totally.
Such a good example. And I would also say what I find to be really interesting about transparency is transparency doesn't mean you need to be radically transparent, right? For example, you might decide that your business is all about price, right? So you are let's just say you're a makeup brand, and you're a makeup brand and your whole entire business is built around this idea of giving your customers the lowest price possible on that product. sustainability might not be important to you. It might not. And standing up and confidently saying sustainability is not what our business is about and not trying to hide that, that is radical transparency in and of itself. It's about being authentic to who you really are and owning it,
who you aren't,
and finding and who you aren't, and just finding your tribe. Trying to be everything to everyone, I think, is really where it's like a fool's game. And great example, my little sister, Austin, she's an artist and she works with Adidas. She lives and breathes Adidas, and I live and breathe Nike. And that is okay. We are very different people.
You still come to Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we still hang out. And she is an Adidas girl all day long, and I'm a Nike girl all day long. And those are the tribes we belong in. So I think it's just a really good example of what being who you are, which could apply to, by the way, being a leader and being a brand.
Totally. I think if you look at like the cult brands, which, whether people say it or not, a lot of people building a brand from scratch, they really want a cult brand. That means you find those audiences that like obsessively love you. Those cult brands do things where they're radically transparent about what they do and don't. And they usually have like one thing that's really unique, like a Nike or an Apple or a Tesla, or in this case, Levels. I think they're on their way because they do something a little different that nobody does. And the people that are in their tribe really love it.
Yeah. And generally that doing something that nobody does doesn't come from looking around you. It comes from looking internally. I think what often happens is we look around us at the world of what other brands are doing and we try to simulate what's working for them, when really saying, hey, you know what, let's publish our internal documents via, Google Docs and share them out. That probably came through a discussion of thinking about who they were and how they could connect with their audience,
Totally.
So I totally think that that's a really cool example. I'm definitely going to check them out.
Yeah, check them out for sure. A question I had for you, and what you said a couple takes ago, was I really want to double click on it. And it's when you were deciding what to build, you wanted to balance the like, be happy, be driven, right? Be fulfilled, be empowered. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are struggling to find that line. Could you just talk through like, what was your thought process to get there? It took you, right, probably 15 years in your career to be able to strike that balance. Like what's your thinking around that, and how do you achieve that?
Such a good question, and was a really impactful unlock for me. I can't say I have all the answers, but I definitely figured a few things out. I was sort of on this path towards becoming a CMO internally at an organization, right? Arguably a fast-paced, high-growth company, whether that was big or small, like a Michael Kors or a Sweetgreen. And I just genuinely woke up one day and realized like I had lost sight of why I was there, what was fueling me. And I kind of realized like I wasn't happy. Like it comes back to being that simple. And I was in a dream job at a company that I absolutely loved, with a team that I was obsessed with, in a mission-driven company. Like all of the check boxes were checked.
Why do you think you weren't happy if you like look really inward?
Because honestly, I think that I'm an entrepreneur. And I think that I had been for 13, 14 years in sort of these more corporate roles. And I had always been flexing my entrepreneurial muscle, but it got to a point where I realized there was something I wasn't doing that was really just true to me. And at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I was going to go off and do, but I just knew it was time for me to really be like, I'm going to go be an entrepreneur.
That's awesome.
And I think there's a couple of things that came with that. One, freedom and flexibility, right? And I'm a workaholic. Like anyone that knows, when I say flexibility, I create less flexibility for myself at Farrynheight than I ever had at another company. But self-inflicted feels different. Freedom and flexibility, sort of the ability to lead. But I'm going to be honest, I don't think I wanted a boss. Like I think that I woke up and was like, for me to feel fulfilled, I think I want to be my own boss. And a lot of us out there who are entrepreneurs can understand that. Those sort of inputs and feelings might not be true to everyone. But for me, there was just a couple of key real instincts that I was feeling that I couldn't ignore. And the minute I stopped ignoring them, and the minute that I started letting go of what I thought the right path was for me, and letting go of the fear of the unknown, is really the minute that I started to kind of fly and really find, I think about Farrynheight as like my flow state in my career.
Yeah, I love that.
Like I'm in my flow state right now. I'm doing work that's meaningful to me. I'm making an impact because it's stuff I really love to do and know how to do. I'm figuring it all out. I'm crafting a culture and a team exactly how I envision wanting it. And I think hopefully my team wants it to be. So I think for those people who are out there really just trying to figure it out, I think like look for the cues and look for the signs and figure out what's a non-negotiable for you.
Yeah, that definitely hits home with me. Isn't it funny how when you stop, like, it doesn't make sense, but when you stop caring, everything starts happening. It doesn't make sense.
No, everything I was afraid of, leaving a corporate environment and sort of the name of my job, you know, leaving the security and stability, not going after that sort of North Star of that big CMO role that I always thought was like what I wanted. And by the way, it might be what I want in 10 years. Like what you want is not binary. I don't know where I'm going to be I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, you know?
I mean, you are a CMO and a CEO.
At
Now
the
you're
same
both.
time, I get to be both, you know, and I get to do it in this sort of, by the way, fast-paced, high growth, always on, really intense way that fuels me and is sort of, you know, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I'm an adrenaline junkie. So I'm like the battle royale of brand building, you know? And that's what, yeah. So maybe this was all sort of for a reason, but it definitely came from a moment of what I thought was failure. And so I think back to the hard stuff. I was at a place where I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I felt sort of a little depleted and sort of in search of meaning. I tried a bunch of stuff before Farrynheight really codified and in my mind failed. And it was out of totally a place of having nothing to lose that I just started doing the stuff that I was good at, felt good, and was fun. And I can think of so many times where I sat back and said, like, why can't I build my own company or why can't I do this? And it was the minute that I kind of stopped caring that it literally happened. Like I woke up one day, I was like, oh my God, I have 7 employees. How did I even get here? Do any of you have contracts? Like, you know, like how are you getting paid? Like
That's really funny. Yeah,
you know?
I literally blacked out and blacked
yeah,
out again.
literally I did.
On Playroll.
I fully blacked out. I blacked out.
That's crazy. When you think about like when you look internally and like self-reflect, what do you think are the core things that like motivate you and like give you purpose, like at your absolute core?
I could answer that on a couple of different levels. I think what gets me up every morning is my team and the founders that I feel really, really lucky to work with and have trust and faith, you know, mutually with. You know, being able to simultaneously build multiple brands and businesses, in some ways we feel like a VC, but we do it through our brand, right? We're helping to build brands through sweat and hard work and a lot of heart. And building a brand is an emotional experience. You know, it is completely ego-driven and emotional and has tons of anxiety, and you're putting your heart, your soul, your products out into the world. And so I think we take a lot of responsibility in that. So what gets me up every morning is my founders and my team. What gets me going at, you know, as Farryn, if you will, is I have a passion and a zest for life that I think I bring to both my work and my business. That's just inherent to who I am. I don't do things halfway. I do things in a pretty intense and extreme way. And so I think living a little extreme is just what makes me probably exhausted and fulfilled at the same time.
Feel alive.
You know, feel alive. I definitely think that I'm on a little bit of a mission to connect people. I think that storytelling always became a way that you can connect people and make people understand that like we're all human and that there's so much about all of us that is different, but there is so much that is the same. And I think brands at the end of the day, there's the commercial side of what we do. We want to build businesses. We want to make money. Of course, we want to create profitability for shareholders, for, you know, for our teams. But I think we also just want to connect. I think we all want to belong. And I think that marketing, when it's done, and brand building, when it's done the right way, is about making people feel like they belong.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well said. A few more questions for you. I feel like we could talk for 3 hours.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
This idea of like wellness, and I call it the wellness stack. I truly believe the different components of wellness all work together and compound. And when you've got a lot of that dialed in, sleep, fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, when you have that dialed in, things start to happen like at a compounding level. So I'd love to ask a few questions around kind of your wellness routine, but at a high level, before we go into that, how do you think about wellness in your life and kind of how does it play a part in your day-to-day?
When I worked for Michael Kors, I was in my 20s. I was probably sleeping 2 hours a night. I was working at this like global scale where like one day a week I was on the phone with China, one day was Europe, one day was Asia. I mean, it was just crazy. And I did not value slowing down, caring about myself or caring for myself. In fact, it was back in the sort of mid 2000s when there was really this like hustle mentality and like this very much like lean in girl boss energy where taking care of yourself was almost looked down upon. You were really rewarded for staying at the office all night long. I remember constantly being like, I slept here and thinking that was cool. it wasn't until I really broke down physically and an incredible leader said to me, how, and really taught me, how can you show up as a leader if you're not leading yourself? And it wasn't until I went to Sweet Green that I started to understand the difference between my leadership when I was well fed, well slept, had created space and clarity versus when I was running on empty. I will say this isn't something I'm really good at. Back to what we talked about before around key learnings of growing a business. And I think a lot of founders out there or any teams can relate to this, which is when you're hustling and you're holding it together and you're a leader. For me, the first thing I sacrifice is myself. I'll give my team a day off and then I will work the whole day to make up for it. So it's definitely something I work on daily, but it is something that we talk a lot at Farrynheight about having a zero tolerance policy for the hustle mentality, right? Like at other, when we hear someone say like, I haven't slept or I'm overworked, we have this sort of saying at Farrynheight called raising a hand. And raising a hand means like, if you see something, say something. And if you see that someone is not taking care of themselves, raise a hand because, and this really comes from studying John Wooden. So John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach, another one of my great mentors, taught me all about him and his story. And I've since become like obsessed with the metaphor of coaching and teams with marketing and brand and building my company. I know nothing about sports, so I'm just going to put that out there.
I was going to say,
right?
That's impressive.
Thank you. But I know a lot about John Wooden and I've learned a lot about him and I read the books, his books and his lessons. And one of the things you realize is if you're thinking about a team like a basketball team, if someone on that basketball team hasn't slept, ate the wrong meal, is exhausted, is full of anxiety, there is no way that team is going to win.
Definitely not.
If everyone takes care of themselves and shows up on the court, even if you lose, you've still won. And so I think a lot about wellness really as a metaphor for the only way you're going to play your best game is if you're taking care of yourself, which then becomes something everyone is accountable to being responsible for. And if you go out on that field, you play or the court and you play the best game and you still lose, like it doesn't matter. But when you didn't take care of yourself and you lose, it feels different. And I think that's really something I try to integrate into our culture. I talk about sports. We're an all-female team. I know nothing about sports and I talk about sports on every team meeting. It's sort of an internal joke,
Yeah.
Someone
you're going to get out there. You're going to have your best game.
Out there. Yeah. Like, I'm always like, I'll name a random player and be like, do you think that this player like didn't sleep the night before the game? No. So I think it is a tall order asking people to see themselves as a priority in order to show up every day at your best, in order to play a role that is really strong on a team is a little bit of a tall order.
It's a mindset shift for some people that aren't like that. I feel like it would be hard not to be well fed at Sweet Green. So yes. I'm sure that was when you dialed
I smelled
it in.
like a salad for the entire time that I worked there. It was 3 years of just being covered, never got sick of it, that I have to say. Talk about great product. Radical dedication to a great product.
What a work perk that had to have
Yes,
been.
It was. It really was.
Yeah.
No complaints there.
Are there any products or routines you have? Like what's your morning routine? And like when you think about sleep, mindfulness, like what's your typical go-to?
Yeah. So I'll kind of give you the fast versions of these answers. I've had a mindfulness practice for the last 5 years. Actually just recently interviewed my teacher and mentor, Mitra Manesh, on the Farrynheight podcast. And she's a mindfulness teacher. She's a teacher at UCLA. And she really thinks about how do you take the practice and sort of methodology of mindfulness and apply it to action. So that is really like, if I had to talk about what I think of as my leadership or my business methodology, it's really all of the teachings around how do you become more conscious in order to make effective decisions that you're aware of and lead with compassion, with empathy, and really with an awareness of what you're doing. In terms of what I eat, I definitely try to eat vegan in the week. And that really came from a position of recognizing what fuels me and makes me feel better. I operate and think clearer on a little bit of empty. So I normally wake up in the morning, I drink water and coffee until a little bit in the afternoon where my body's telling me it's ready for food. I find that if I have a heavy meal in the morning or in the afternoon, I don't think as clearly.
Yeah, it drags you down.
It drags me down. So for me, I really like to be sort of like on the ball. And I find that being like just a little bit empty helps me to be clearer. And then I like to eat vegan during the week. I find that it makes me feel a little lighter. I eat whatever I want on the weekend. I have complete, I'm very much about intuitive everything. Intuitive eating, intuitive sleeping, intuitive just understanding back to mindfulness, it's really about understanding what works for you and really having no judgment about it, right? I am like a very large consumer of carbohydrates. I love bread, works for me, but I don't eat dairy. And that's just a choice that I've made because I really learned to listen to my body.
Totally. This is the last question. This is a question we asked to everybody on the show. So pumped to get your take. So it's a startup manifesto. So if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
The first, failure is a gift. Don't miss an opportunity to fail. The second would be negative feedback is ammunition to become better, faster, and stronger. Without it, you're never going to really grow because you won't learn what's critical. I really learned from an incredible leader how to look at opportunities for negative feedback, and now I actually get excited about them. We try to provide the best, experience for any founder that we work with. But sometimes when there's a misstep, I'm like, ooh, this is an opportunity for me to figure out where and why, for me to fix it, change it, and then maybe productize something better. So don't be afraid of feedback. Understand your non-negotiables as a business. Understand what is a non-negotiable to you as a leader, to your company, and to your team, and use it as guardrails for decision-making. Have a radical dedication to your product and your values, which we've talked about today. And the last would be never lose sight of the North Star and why you're there.
It's a great list. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Good.
So before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. I think this honestly has been, my favorite podcast I've had so far. And I think the reason why is because you're so authentic to your brand. That authenticity is, we've talked about it, it's so important. And the people that actually live and breathe what they say and what they do, it's really inspiring. So I hope that anybody who takes the hour to listen to this takes that away. And I just want to say I appreciate you coming on, and I'll be a huge fan of the brand and you as you continue to grow.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. I am honored and humbled. And that is the nicest compliment anyone could give. And it's been awesome chatting with you. We could talk for 3 hours. Your voice is also so soothing that it is hard it is hard to not relax. I feel like I've been in a journey, but I think it's funny because a lot of the promise you make as a business and a brand is aspirational. You're not going to always get it right. There are moments that I fail. And, 2 weeks ago, I had a real moment where I for a couple days was I feel like a failure. I just feel like I'm not getting it right. But in those moments of opportunity, you realize we're all just human. Every CEO is just a human. Every business, we're all just human. Customers, we're all just humans. And I think that if you give yourself a little bit more of leeway and a little bit more credit, a little bit more of that ability to fail, I think that you have an ability to find your flow more. When I was really rigid about who I was and what I was able to do and how perfect it had to be, I never gave myself the ability to really find my center and find myself. So it's really nice to hear that you can sense that and see that. And I hope that we continue this discussion in another form and fashion.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'd love to have you on again. It's all about the flow state.
Awesome. Yeah, it really is. Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Thank you for listening to that episode with Farryn Weiner of Farrynheight. If you're loving the show and want to support, there's a couple quick things you could do that would really help us out. 1, we know you're busy and might not always have time to listen to the full episode each week, and that's okay. In addition to releasing the episode, each Tuesday, we'll send out a 5-minute email recap with a summary of the weekly conversation. We also plan to use that email list for fun giveaways in the future, so be sure to sign up. Go to thefounder.substack.com to sign up. 2, go into your Apple Podcast app and do 3 quick things that take less than 30 seconds. Press the subscribe button, leave a 5-star rating, and then write a couple-sentence positive review on why the show inspired you. These ratings and reviews are super important, and they signal to Apple that they should put our show in front of other people that might like it. 3, follow us on Twitter and Instagram @FounderPodcast. Each week we put out teasers, audio clips, and important quotes from the episode. And lastly, check out our website as a mission control for the show. Go to thefounderpod.com. We have a page on there called Special Offers where we link up all the discount codes from our founders' companies, as well as the books and resources they recommend. I hope you enjoyed that episode and are looking forward to the next one. Until then, I'm Kallaway, and this is The Founder.